Blog Talk Radio.
Welcome to Voices for Change 2.0, the only podcast that focuses on mental health while mixing in movies, music, books, sports, and pop culture. Here are your hosts, Rebecca and Joe Lombardo.
Hey, good morning, everybody, and welcome to Voices for Change 2.0.
Yeah, thanks for tuning in today. It's the middle of September already.
Yeah.
What do you think of that?
I don't know what to think of it. Honestly, it's
leaves are starting to change on the trees.
It's a little overwhelming to consider what lies ahead. But
you know, considering where you live in the country anyway, leaves are changing color on the trees.
Yeah.
There's a bit of a chill in the air a lot of the days now, and got to turn off the air conditioning. Thank God. Yeah, this is I'm feeling renewed in life from
that's good.
how we're feeling
That's
with
good.
the weather and such, you know.
Mhm.
So there's that.
Today is Jenny's birthday.
Is it?
Yep. If my BFF from Chicago decides to listen to the show, I'll send her a link, and she will. But happy birthday. I hope you have a great day.
Yeah, happy birthday.
And I miss you.
And she misses you. So, been getting to watch some football lately. That's been pretty cool.
Mm-hmm. Our producer, Scott, is not a football fan.
No.
We found that out in an interesting way.
Yep, but that's okay. We don't judge.
No, not at all.
And you're probably going to hear jingling in the background during the course of the day for a show, and or possibly whining and or barking. And that would be our little Yorkie friend Gucci that we're watching right now. He's currently exploring the bedroom. We got him for a handful of days, and
yeah, if he's not around me, he gets very upset. He has become very possessive over me, and if Joe leans in to try to kiss me, he tries to bite Joe.
Yeah, that's fun.
Yeah.
Although I've won him over with treats, so there's that.
Yeah.
So now I'm getting kisses too, which is pretty cool. But he's a cute little dude. Kind of weird, but we like him. So.
Yeah. We watched a really good movie last night.
Yeah, we did. We watched X-Men: Dark Phoenix, and that was pretty good. Went ahead and bought it.
Yeah,
and,
it's very good.
Yeah.
It's kind of sad. No spoilers, but there's some sadness in it.
Yeah. So, I'm curious to see what they do with the X-Men going forward, because I know the MCU is planning on introducing X-Men into the rest of the Marvel universe. I don't know if they're going to recast anybody or what. I haven't heard anything, but I know they're getting ready to start Phase 4 of the movies now, and I think X-Men are going to be introduced in Phase 5. So it's going to be a few years yet, but I think that they're getting their ducks in a row on that.
Tell people what MCU stands for.
Oh, MCU is the Marvel Cinematic Universe. So all the Marvel movies that you've seen over the last 10 years that weren't X-Men or Fantastic Four.
Yikes. Bad.
Yeah. Those are pretty much Marvel movies. The Spider-Man movies that feature Tobey Maguire and Andrew Garfield do not count, but the ones featuring Tom Holland do count. Those are part of the MCU.
It's all very confusing.
Yes.
They like to keep us on our toes.
Yeah, but it's good watching, so highly recommend. So let's
what's on the docket for today?
Yeah, get jumping into our show here.
Absolutely. So today we've got a really special guest. She's very special to me, and I'm getting emotional talking about it. But she's a really good friend, and we've been in contact for several years now. And I can't remember exactly where we met, if it was on Twitter or just through the process of her reading my book, but she's great. She's a light, for other people.
Yes.
Definitely an amazing mental health advocate that we're just really honored to know. So she's also an author, and she's a bipolar survivor. So please welcome to the show, Kitt O'Malley.
Thank you. That was quite an introduction. I'm blushing now.
Aw. Well, we're
Rebecca,
happy to have you on the show.
all those things I could say about you too, and Joe as being a very supportive partner. The work you do is incredible, you guys. It's wonderful how much you do in terms of educating and supporting others and getting the word out. I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you very much.
Yeah, it means a lot to us. And, we've got the utmost respect for you and everything that you do and have done and will do. And we're so happy that you're spending the next hour or so with us.
Yay.
So, do you have any questions for us before we jump into things?
I don't think so. I mean, I know that I guess I can throw in. I love the Marvel universe and watching all that stuff too. So I was kind of geeking out as I was listening to you, going, "Oh, me too." Definitely.
We've just had an unsettling development here at Radio Central. The dog has crawled under the bed.
Maybe it'll keep him quiet.
Oh, maybe.
Yeah, I think. Yeah, maybe.
Happily, there's no cat underneath there.
Yeah,
so.
really. Oh my goodness.
He's a little guy.
Boy.
It's easy for him to get underneath.
Yeah.
Yeah. Let me. You know what? I'm gonna turn the show over to you, babe. I'm gonna try and get him out really quick.
Okay.
All right. Because he can't be under there. I'm sorry, guys. Just keep listening. Ignore any noises that you hear in the background.
All right, so I'm going to go ahead and proceed with the questions. This is definitely an unexpected development, but we will move forward because we're professional podcasters. All right. So, Kitt, we're going to start off with a question that we ask virtually all of our guests, and that is, where does your mental health journey begin?
Okay. Well, my mental health journey began when I was 18 years old, and I was a freshman at UCLA, and I was suicidal. So I never attempted it, but I had was basically right on the edge where I had the means, a plan, all those sort of things that are sort of checklists for people who are assessing suicidality. And, I got all the thing, luckily I was able to sort of observe myself, kind of like, I guess, you would train yourself to do through CBT. I sort of observed what I was doing and realized, oh no, this is dangerous. I might actually act on my ideation. And so I called a friend of mine who and asked her if she could hang out with me until I got in to see a psychologist. And then I told my resident assistant in the dorms, please get me to find a really good psychologist for me, so that I can see today at UCLA. And then I went into what was cognitive therapy, where all my negative, suicidal or just all those lies depression tells you, I would write down and then rewrite them. So that was my beginning, and it was sort of since then, I wasn't diagnosed bipolar then, I was diagnosed depressed. And later I was diagnosed dysthymic, which is sort of a chronic moderate depression, until I was 39, and then I was diagnosed bipolar. So that's it in a nutshell, but what happened during those different transitions I could go more into.
Okay.
if you want.
Oh, absolutely. Please do.
So during my 20s, then I managed still to, using therapy, I managed to, get my bachelor's. I quit UCLA because I was just too depressed. I got mono, so I guess, often when we're, our mental health is failing or is challenged, it affects, or just any stressor, it affects your physical health. So
Right.
I got mono, and the mono was sort of my excuse because I was falling asleep all the time to quit UCLA and take a semester off. I didn't tell my parents about my suicidality because I was ashamed, but I told my friends. So that's sort of telling that, that I'm sure other people have that too, where they think that they're less than because they are struggling with a mental health issue. And I thought my parents would think that I was a failure, which was in itself an irrational thought, because I was depressed. So, but I didn't think it was, I thought that, the acceptance of mono over depression, you know what I mean? It's just like both are illnesses.
Right.
So then I did therapy throughout my 20s, and I actually became a psychotherapist. I got a master's in psychology, and I'm still a licensed marriage and family therapist. And I did in my mid-20s, and from that time until I was 30, I worked in nonprofits with severely emotionally disturbed children and adults, and pregnant and parenting adults, until I had a session in which a 16-year-old male client who was very tall, very big, much bigger than I was. He was like 6 feet tall. He threatened to rape me during a session. And after that, I just couldn't get myself to go back to work. So it was just too traumatic. It was like, why am I doing this?
Yeah.
It wasn't like I was in
that's
private practice.
terrifying.
I was working with, the most troubled kids. And so then I turned to, at that point, I couldn't even get out of bed, so I turned to my doctor for medication, and then went to be a psychiatrist, my internist, my general doctor, and then went to see a psychiatrist for a second opinion. And what happened between those two doctors and in a short period of time is that I was taken on and off multiple antidepressants. And finally, that rapid change in antidepressants triggered a full-blown psychotic manic episode for a week. After that, I was put on antipsychotics just to end the mania, and then I was stabilized on a low dose of antidepressants throughout my 30s until I was 39, and then I recognized that elated feeling. Oh, God's calling me to this church or to that church. And there was nothing wrong with what I thought God was calling me to do. There's nothing wrong with doing Bible study, or there's nothing wrong with going for spiritual direction. But the feeling that was attached to it, God's calling me, and this very elated, euphoric feeling, I recognized as hypomania or mania. And so I called the advice nurse on our insurance and asked my husband to stay on the phone so he could understand the seriousness of this. And I described my symptoms to the advice nurse, and she said, go to the ER or to a psychiatrist today. And so I started medication for bipolar disorder at that point. Actually at that point, I put my son in, I was a stay-at-home mom right then. I mean, I went back and forth. I worked, and then I didn't work. At that point, I was not working. I was staying home with him. But as soon as I got that diagnosis of bipolar, I had internalized stigma against a diagnosis of depression versus a diagnosis of bipolar. I was the same person, but with the change in label, I thought I was, I had a progressive, serious mental illness, and I was worried for my son, and that I would be a bad mother. And so I put him in daycare and went back to work because I thought somebody else caring for him is better than me, which is really a tragic thing to think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so and then I was working at a job that had crazy hours, and I was still back to my hypomanic workaholism, and at times worked until 2 a.m. with colleagues at work, like that was what was demanded of us. And I ended up hospitalized at 42, and that kind of since then I've been home on disability because I don't know. I did 2 weeks. 2 weeks I was in the hospital, and for months I was in the partial hospitalization day treatment until I felt well enough to not be in day treatment and or partial hospitalization. And actually I had my son. By that time he went from preschool to a preschool daycare to kindergarten, and I had him do like the after school stuff in kindergarten, because kindergarten's usually just a couple hours. So he did like the full school day. And recently, he's 19 now, he asked me why I did that. Why was he in the after school stuff? Why couldn't he go home like the other kindergartners? And I said, because I thought it was better for him. So, I just thought it was better for him.
It can sometimes be a hard thing to try and explain to the kids, what you're going through and why you're doing the things that you do. And, hopefully he understood when you explained to him that, you were doing it in his best interest, versus, because kids are really good at conjuring up all sorts of crazy
negative thoughts.
Yeah. And, hopefully that kind of helped him understand that, no, it wasn't anything with you, bud. It's just, mom was going through this stuff and, thought this was the best situation,
Right. And he's 19 now, and he just asked me that question like yesterday or the day before, but he was, when he was 4, my husband brought him to the hospital every day. I was in the hospital for dinner, like meeting, time when guests could come was right after dinner time. So my son would eat because there's still food out in the warming trays, and so he'd wait and eat with me during that time, and he would call it eating like a family. So cute. He was so adorable, and all the other patients, or people who were in the hospital, but all the other people who were there just loved having him because he was such a little bright light for everybody, and he was just adorable. Eat like a family. You had to have something normalized. You know what I mean? So
it's nice too that you have that. It's real nice that you're able to do that.
Right. Not all hospitals have that, and there are some hospitals now are getting even better at both for children and for adults, including the family in the treatment, because it's just doing the individual and not either educate the family or give support to the family is really just inadequate. The family is affected by the mental health, and the family, and I relied on the family to help me, so I'm sure you don't know what that's like, and Rebecca too, how important it is that our partners, like our husbands, are in our recovery. So my husband has been huge, in being my caretaker, I guess you would say at times. So, taking on more responsibilities than he did before I before the hospitalization, when I was being like this little workaholic person trying to do it all, and I wasn't able to do it all. Did I lose you guys? Hello? Hello? I'm going to call back in.
Why do I feel discouraged? Why do the shadows come? And why does my heart feel lonely and long for heaven and home? When Jesus is my portion, a constant friend is He. His eyes on the sparrow, and I know He watches me. His eyes on the sparrow, and I know He watches me. So I sing because I am happy, and I sing because I am free. His eyes on the sparrow, and I know He watches me. So I sing because I am happy, and I sing because I am free. His eyes on the sparrow, and I know He watches, and I know He watches, and I know He watches me.
Hey guys, welcome back to Voices for Change 2.0. Sorry about the impromptu song break. We had a bit of a network issue, and those are the breaks when you're on a live radio show. But we're back.
Hopefully for the rest of the hour.
Yes, hopefully there won't be another issue. Had to actually change internet networks that we were on, so on our computer. So I mean it was bizarre because it's never happened before. So hopefully this won't happen again because it was nerve-wracking.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, I'm Joe. She's Rebecca. And on the line is the lovely, wonderful, and talented Kitt O'Malley.
Thank you. Glad to be back.
Absolutely. Yay. So the point I was trying to make really quick before we were so rudely interrupted was, after Beck got out of her last hospitalization, and it's been a few years, but she was terrified of what the next step was coming home. And I think one thing that would have been beneficial, and I think this needs to happen across the board with anytime you go in for mental health treatment, is I think the doctors or somebody needs to work with the rest of the family to help them prepare for when the patient is actually coming home from a hospitalization, just to make that transition a little bit easier.
I totally agree with you.
Yeah, I think that's one spot, the more I think about it, that we're really lacking as far as mental health coverage. It's great that, the patients are getting treated, but, there needs to be some kind of preparation for the family too, and it's really no different than if you think about certain physical afflictions. Someone suddenly is a paraplegic or a quadriplegic and is now in a wheelchair, and the rest of the family has to adjust to that, or even adjustments have to be made to the house or something like that. Some kind of accommodation, but something that preps the family. I really think that having that resource available for the families of mental illness patients would be a beneficial thing.
Yeah.
I totally agree. Yep.
Yay, we're all on board.
And there are organizations like NAMI that are really advocating for that too. They kind of believe in, and I volunteer for them, believe in the NAMI is the National Alliance on Mental Illness. They believe in a sort of team collaborative effort in helping the person who's in recovery for mental health, that they'll be basically a team, of support, and including clinicians and the family and the person. So,
my very first hospitalization, when I was a lot younger, was for longer, and they had my family come in and talk with all of us, but it was very uncomfortable. Like we couldn't openly express ourselves.
Yeah.
It was an uncomfortable situation.
Unfortunately, not every family is even maybe capable of being supportive or it's I know when I first was depressed and asked my mom to come to therapy with me, she got very defensive when I was 19, and she said, "No, you're the problem." I'm not the problem. You're the problem.
Nice.
I'm like, I don't think you're the problem, Mom. My therapist just thinks that it would be helpful to work on our relationship, because she's a mom of teenage girls too, who are becoming adults, and knows that that what goes on between your parents and you when you're an adolescent. But my mom wouldn't go. She just blamed all the problems on me, and I'm like, okay. I guess, later I realized I'm the identified patient, and that's fine. At least I'm getting help. So,
yeah.
Right.
But my
sucks
parents,
that
when I was 30 and had that psychotic breakdown that I was talking to you about, by that time they knew, that I was dealing with this serious mental illness. And they didn't necessarily go to therapy with me, but they do anything they could to help. And I actually ended up moving back in with them. And I was able to, after having been a clinician and having been in therapy for so long, realize that they were going out of their way for me. They might still be defensive in terms of going to therapy, but in every other way they were going to try to help and support me.
That's good. I was going to ask you that if they eventually came around to support you.
They did, because it was so clear. I was like, I was psychotic. It was clear that I was I had a brain, that there was something wrong. That it wasn't something that it was just like I don't know. Just lost that thought. It was clear, it was clear to me that I needed psychiatric help seriously, which I had known when I was, started off before I had the break. It was clear that I needed better psychiatric help, and it was clear that I couldn't really take care of myself because I kept on trying to pick myself up by the bootstraps and go, over a few months after that break, before and after that break, when I was kind of pulling myself up by the bootstraps in terms of depression, and then in terms of the break, that I wasn't able to do it by myself because I lived by myself. But, I'd been supporting myself and all that, and I just realized I needed my parents' help. That and it was clear that they loved me. And I think what helped me a lot with that, in addition to sort of working through family of origin issues in therapy, was that as a therapist, I worked with families that were far more dysfunctional than mine. Some of the kids were abused, and it wasn't like, it was like that's why they were in residential, let's say, or day treatment, was because of trauma. And some had full-on brain disorders, but others were PTSD, and some have both, obviously. But because mental illness is sort of multi-generational, the illness is such as bipolar in our genetic, or have a genetic component. But as a therapist, I had compassion for families because I could see that they loved their kids in spite of the dysfunction. They just were kind of like repeating patterns they had learned. And they had to deal with their own issues. They had their own particular issues, psychologically and psychiatrically, and they weren't bad people because of it. They just needed help. And so I had compassion because of that, and I had worked through a lot of my anger and frustration and stuff in terms of my parents' alcoholism, sort of dealt with those issues in terms of being, a kid raised in an alcoholic family. But I also realized that, the dysfunction in my family, like every family has something, right? And the level of my family was not nearly as bad as others, and that my parents clearly loved me and would go out of their way. Like when I first had the break, or a friend of mine called both the priest in my church and my dad, or my parents, and said, Kitt needs you now, and my priest came right over with somebody who was bipolar, who was in seminary, and to be with me while my dad flew up, like right then, right after he got off the phone, he flew up. So that was just that response from my family was so obviously to me a supportive response that they would fly up at a moment's notice because of my health. I just really, ever since then, I just really appreciated how much they loved me,
Yeah, for sure.
Absolutely. So we're gonna change up gears and talk a little bit about what you've been doing. And we're gonna start with your blog. Why did you start it?
I started my blog in September 2013, and actually the trigger that got me starting writing was hypomania. And the hypomania was triggered, or for those who don't know about triggering, was like, I'll just use the word triggered. It means that it was a result of, or something. I'll just tell this. I'm stumbling over my words right now. I need a little bit more coffee, or maybe a little bit less. What happened was my father-in-law got sepsis and was put into a medically induced coma, and my husband flew up to be with him, with his family, his siblings and mother and father, and it was very stressful for me. It was because I loved my father-in-law. I still do. He's alive. He survived it. Mm-hmm. But I knew it was like touch and go. that the hospital has said if he makes it, he needs to make it through the next 48 hours. And I'm like, oh my gosh, that's serious. And and so there was that fear of my, and love for my father-in-law, that love for my husband, who was going through so much. Well, my son too, it's his grandfather, and and also just not having my husband around for 3 weeks was hard. So there was all that stuff going on, and so then I started getting stressed out and started getting hypomanic, and so what I did with all those racing thoughts and emotion was to start writing, because writing is really therapeutic, and that's when I started the blog, and it sort of grew from there. I started with the blog, and then there was this wonderful mental health community, of bloggers, which is where I think probably, Rebecca, we met each other is through our blog. And other social media, because then as I started blogging, I started to connect to other social media, and as I wrote more and more, I questioned whether these posts were the beginning of a book, and I did put all the posts together at one point and self-published a book, but the self-published, my dad died like 3 weeks after I had done that, and I realized, okay, well, first of all, I just like dumped my posts into a book. I didn't do any editing, and second of all, since my dad died, I was too much in mourning to do any book marketing, so I took it off. I took it off the market and decided to publish it with a friend's publishing company, Eliza Tristan, and I realized I needed like what's called book coaching or developmental editing, which is where somebody takes you through step by step what you need to do to either write a book from scratch, or in my case, to have a major edit, like a major redo. And so that major redo, because I had different topics that were like themes throughout my posts, my blog over the years. And I started off with living with bipolar, and then also it was clear that I was believed in writing purposefully. And a big thing in my what I like to say to people is that your life has purpose. It's everybody's life has purpose. And then I also wrote about advocacy, being a mental health advocate. And then I wrote about caretaking, because not only of my son, which it's been challenging. It's easier now that he's 19. Luckily he's a great kid, but he was challenging because of his diagnoses. And he was a migraineur, and along with that, he had ADHD and depression and anxiety, which tend to be co-occurring, comorbid with mental health issues, like where you don't know what's the chicken and what's the egg, because they kind of all go together. And then my mom had a stroke, and this is another reason why, going back to the beginning, why my grandfather, my brain's a little mushy because I'm at Seroquel right now. So my father-in-law, when he had that crisis, it reminded me, or made it very real to me, that my parents were that I was in that time of life when my parents were likely to, were older, and were likely to, that this was something that might happen to me, to my parents.
To them,
what I mean? That it wasn't just my father-in-law, who I love, but all of a sudden, all of that generation, I realized, oh my gosh, we're in that chapter of our lives where our parents' health is deteriorating, and we might lose them. So when in November 2015, my mom had a stroke, and she had been the caregiver of my father, who had alcohol-related dementia. So when she had the stroke, she wasn't able. It was major. Like, she's no longer able to speak or understand like a lot of symbolic language or language at all. She can understand emotions and some words, but it's really hard to communicate with her because she doesn't really. Her stroke damaged her brain really badly. So at that point, with my sister's help, we had to put our parents in memory care, which was hard, but it was the best thing for them because they really needed that extra care. So that was also like taking care of business and that caretaking in terms of my parents, and being in between taking care of a kid who has needs and parents who have needs. That kind of was that portion too.
Yeah.
Yeah, that can be overwhelming.
It is overwhelming, without a doubt. It's overwhelming. Yeah. Luckily now things are pretty stable. I mean, my mother's health isn't great, but she's just the Energizer Bunny. Nothing will keep that woman down. She's just like amazing. She's a survivor of over 30 years of non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. And she keeps on going. She's amazing.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Yeah. You mentioned something a little while ago on when you were working on re-releasing your book, and
congratulations about that, by the way.
Yes.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
One thing you mentioned was you're working with book coaches, and a question I actually had farther down the line, but I'm going to ask it now, is what was it like revisiting your work with the book coaches helping this time? Having that extra set of eyes and outside perspectives interjecting on your work.
Well, there's both. At first I reacted in a very sort of defensive way.
Okay.
Because it stressed me out, and I was kind of like my ego was like, no, I don't want to change my book, or that's too much work, or you know what I mean. So at first I reacted defensively, and then I took a step back and I realized, I knew when I published the book that I was just sort of dumping posts without rhyme or reason, just sort of in reverse chronological order. So I knew it needed work, and I just wasn't. It was just so hard to even do that I decided I'm just going to throw this out there in the world. So
yeah.
But Aaron J. Smith was my book coach, which is also called a developmental editor. And what he did was in reading my book, he said, you have those themes that I discussed earlier, bipolar disorder, writing with purpose, advocacy, and caretaking. He said, let's just organize your writing by themes. So that was like my first huge step. Like it wasn't something I could do in a week or something. I'm like, okay, that's going to take a while, and it's overwhelming. So I'm just going to have to take my time doing that to the extent that I can, rather than trigger hypomania. And luckily, my publisher and my book coach both they're known for publishing mental health books. So I was and Aaron, when you're working with somebody who also is a mental health advocate, that helps.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because they get it that it's like, I need to take time to do this because it's hard. But once I'd done that big first step, which then we were able to shape it into something that was much better than my original book, and my particular coach was very gentle with me.
Oh, that's good.
That's good.
Like, good job. How about this? You know what I mean? So that
right.
I used so much because it's hard to, have somebody else look at your book, and I just wasn't used to that. And so as somebody who just publishes myself, like on a blog, I don't usually have somebody, nobody's editing my blog post, so to speak.
Right.
So but it resulted in a much better book. So, and I realized how much I needed editing, basically, and that most people who are like professional writers have like a lot of feedback. Like they have what do they call them? Beta readers, and like even before it gets to an editor, like beta readers, who just a few people that to read it and give you some feedback, and then they'll have an editor like who does more like what my editor did, and then if the editor feels like the book needs a lot of work rather than just tweaking, then they'll send you to a developmental editor or to do more of a major overhaul, and then again it goes to an editor and then a proofer. You know what I mean? There's so many steps.
Right.
That having somebody out, that helped me shape it into a more polished product than I had just thrown out into the world.
Yeah, and that's important. Beck went through kind of a similar thing with her book. She had written it, and a publisher that we were going to work with had gone through editing it and made all these different suggestions, and it kind of pissed her off at first.
Yeah, it did at first. I definitely was negative towards it at the beginning, and eventually I just saw this person. They weren't being productive for me. She kept saying that I was a terrible writer, but she would get used to it.
Yeah, which
what?
Yeah.
That is not who you want working with you. Definitely not.
Exactly.
You want to have somebody who's supportive, and that's horrible.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Right, but the one good benefit that came out of it is once Beck kind of got an idea of what this lady was talking about as far as in terms of editing and stuff, she was able to go back and revisit the stuff herself and make a lot of the same editing.
Crap out of it.
Yeah, she edited it, and then when we republished it, I went through it, and my going through it was more fixing the issues that our former publisher, a different guy, had mistakes that he had made to the manuscript. So there was a bit of doctoring involved on that, and luckily I'm working on it, and I'm in the same room with her, and I'm like, okay, well, do you want to say this or do you want to say this? And she's like, well, I want to say this. I'm like, okay, and then I can either change it or not. But it's an exhaustive process, to be sure.
Mm-hmm.
It's totally, and it definitely is kind of, if it's not done right, it's definitely kind of, hurts your ego, especially when you're writing something that's so personal.
Right.
I mean, about your mental health journey, that's very personal. So when you really need somebody who's compassionate,
exactly,
read it and give you feedback, and when you have an editor, it's always your choice whether or not you're going to take their advice. Like I would go like one thing at a time, and I go, okay, yes, no, yes, no, in terms of or a compromise. Like I'll say, okay, we could think something's duplicative or in the wrong place in terms of the narrative flow, and I say, okay, I'm not going to get rid of that. What I'm going to do is I'm going to put it with this other thing, and so I mean, it's like don't want to get rid of something, or other times I'm like, okay, you're right, that is duplicative of the other one.
Right.
Right.
So it's good to have somebody who can work with you rather than just like you had people who either aren't competent or are not compassionate in terms of their working with somebody. Like to tell you you're a bad writer is just unacceptable.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I mean, I knew I wasn't a bad writer. I knew that I had something to offer. So, we got rid of her pretty quickly, but it was devastating at first because it felt like my first and only chance at it. So I had to keep working at it until we found somebody else.
Yeah.
Right. And it's your baby, I mean, it's our.
Yeah.
these are like really, and for any writer, really, not just people who are writing memoir about mental health issues, but any writer, really, their writing is their soul, out
Right.
there out there in words. So definitely the editors and beta readers, and I never use beta readers, but all that kind of stuff is important, that they be compassionate and gentle, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, we're getting a little bit close to our end time.
Yeah, already.
We've
Jeez.
got about 6 or so minutes left. So we want you to be able to talk a little bit about what you've got coming up next.
Okay. Well, first of all, I just realized I never told everybody the title of my book.
We meant that.
Yeah,
we meant to ask that too. Sorry.
Yeah. So I'll just say that, and I'll go on to other stuff. It's called Balancing Act, Writing Through a Bipolar Life. So it's basically, the theme of it is how I wrote, using writing therapeutically, writing through a bipolar life. And that should be coming out this week. It's supposed to come out the 19th. It might be the ebook that does. We'll see if it, how it does. It's still getting the interior formatting done. And and then I just so on my blog is kittomalley.com, and actually there are excerpts of my writing there and links to a lot of guest posts I've been doing recently. And let me see what else. Oh, I started to write something with Sarah Fader, but then I put it on the back burner, and that's sort of a sort of fictionalized memoir, because my life before my breakdown was interesting. I lived in Saudi Arabia. Which is different. I lived there from when I was 2 to 7, and so I'm what's considered a third culture kid. Which is a person who spent, like, often you'll find kids of people in the military or something, kids who've lived in a culture that's not their parents' culture and not completely the culture that you're living in. You're kind of in between. And so a third culture kid is a person who has spent, and here I'm quoting a woman called Ruth Van Brecken, who's a co-author of Third Culture Kids, Growing Up Among Worlds. And she said a third culture kid is a person who spent a significant part of his or her developmental years outside their parent culture. The third culture kid builds relationships to all cultures while not having full ownership in any. Although elements from each culture are assimilated into the third culture kid's life experience, the sense of belonging is in relationship to others of the same background, other third culture kids. And I'm reading that quote because it's also kind of like, not just geographic, but also mental health wise. Like, if we live with a mental health diagnosis, like Rebecca and I do, of bipolar, then we're kind of third culture too. Like, the people who truly understand us are other people who live with that. You know what I mean? Because it's not something that people. And it helps in some ways. We're able to then have this ability to understand people in the main culture, normative culture, and understand being, I guess what it's called, neurologically diverse, neuroatypical, so we can live in both those worlds, and it's and there's a positive about that, and that's that, having that compassion and that understanding, and it's but still feeling like an outsider, but then when we're within our tribe, so to speak, feeling like we belong.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
That's a good note to end things on, I think.
Yeah, for sure.
Very solid. Well, Kitt, thank you so much for being with us today. We're going to finish out with one last song, so you stay on the line. And everybody else, you're going to be listening to the song Home by Charlie Peck. Thanks for tuning in this week. We love you all, and we will see you guys next week.
Thank you.